Everyone, Nike here. I wanted to do a quick video about a comment I saw on Reddit. In the thread, a player complained that Guild Wars 1 Endgame was better because there was more diversity in builds, and I kind of wanted to debunk that. First, I'm not going to comment on which game had a better PvE endgame in this video from a content point of view, because mostly that's subjective. Some people really liked Guild Wars 2 raids, other people really like doing Domain of Anguish. It's kind of a to each his own in that regard. But I do think the build diversity comment is discussion worthy. Did Guild Wars 1 have more build diversity than Guild Wars 2? Yes and no. The most fundamental difference between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 is that Guild Wars 1 had heroes and henchmen. I will say that from the time heroes were introduced into the game, casual PvE became a solo game for the overwhelming majority of the players. Even more so once you could have 7 heroes in your party. Even the endgame zones like Domain of Anguish, Fissure of Woe, etc. were able to be done solo with heroes relatively easy for an experienced player. So quote-unquote open world PvE like mapping, vanquishing, and missions was a solo game, or at most a co-op game with a friend who had some heroes too. What did this mean? Well, what it meant was that you never had any peer pressure to improve your build. Koss did not complain if your assassin build wasn't very good. If you liked playing Sabway, Team Comp, you could do essentially the entire game, including most of the endgame elite zones, on hard mode using that build. It didn't matter if there were more efficient team comps. It didn't matter if your personal player build wasn't very good. You could play your own pace and do whatever you wanted to do, and the only pressure on you to improve was whatever pressure you put on yourself. Unless you grouped with other players and had some kind of goal in mind, there was no mandatory reason to min-max or run the absolute most efficient comp or build. Running a bad build didn't let anybody down except yourself, and even then, that only if it matters to you. This is the difference. Guild Wars 2, for the most part, the endgame requires playing with other human players. Other players do not want to fail, and simply put, failure is less likely if everyone is playing efficiently and using objectively good builds. There is a community pressure to conform, because unlike Guild Wars 1, you're actually in a community. It's no different than someone who lives off the grid in the woods somewhere compared to someone who lives in a city. The behavior and norms and weird stuff you can get into are a lot more individualist if you live out in the country all by yourself off the grid than what you would have to, how your behavior and norms and the stuff you did would have to be if you lived in a more urban area. If we made everything equal and forced everyone in Guild Wars 1 to group with human players, the meta would be just as strict as in Guild Wars 2, perhaps even more so, because the roles for the different players would be even more well defined. If Guild Wars 2 had super competent heroes and henchmen, like in Guild Wars 1, you would see that trashy personal player builds would be everywhere. If you wanted to play a Celestial Dagger Ellie in PvE, well, so long as you have heroes to carry you, you could do that easily with no one caring. So no, Guild Wars 1 did not have more build diversity. You can play awful builds in both games. The difference is that in Guild Wars 1 you had AI to carry you, and the AI would never complain if you sucked, or if your build sucked. If you run an awful build in Guild Wars 2, you won't have anyone to carry you, and you'll feel the pressure to change it. So in conclusion, I want to say that I'm not arguing which system was better. Obviously some players will prefer one of those systems over the other, and again that's mostly subjective. But I think it's a big mistake for people to say that Guild Wars 1 had better build diversity without understanding the context of why, namely heroes, that allowed more bad anything goes builds to be possible. Thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to reading your comments below. See you next time.